Exodus Execution. Book 2, Wayfinder's Network. Act 1, The Silent Relay. Chapter 1, The Weight of Silence. The air on Wayfinder Station tasted of regret and recycled hope. It was a taste Kaelen Rook knew intimately, a metallic tang that clung to the back of the tongue, no matter how many times the filtration systems cycled. 1 year. 365 days by the old Earth calendar, they still kept out of habit rather than utility. Time enough for scars to form, for routines to harden into ritual, for the initial frantic energy of survival to settle into the grim daily business of not dying. Rook stood at the observation blister of what had once been Shuttle Bay Alpha, now the beating heart of their fragile civilization. The reinforced battle steel doors that had saved them remained sealed, a permanent monument to Commander Alara Vance's last stand. Beyond the thick composite viewport, the stars stared back, cold and indifferent. Neptune's sapphire bulk dominated the view, its storms swirling with the same slow violence they'd witnessed during their approach to the Novum Avum. The arc itself was gone, vaporized, shattered, or transformed into something unspeakable during the final detonation of its solar spine. All that remained were fragments, a debris field that glittered in the distant sunlight like shards of a broken god. Report. Rook's voice was rougher than it had been a year ago. The phantom pain behind his right eye had settled into a constant, low-grade hum, a permanent resident in his skull. He'd learned to ignore it most days, the way one learns to ignore a familiar ache in an old wound. Lieutenant Anya Hayes, now Chief of Station Operations, didn't turn from the console she was monitoring. Relay array diagnostics complete. Power at 98%. Receiver sensitivity optimal. Transmitter, still non-functional. Still, she confirmed, her voice carefully neutral. The communications relay was their obsession, their prayer, their single thread of connection to a universe that might already be dead. Salvaged from the Ark's secondary systems before the collapse, patched together with parts cannibalized from 3 different wrecked shuttles, it was a technological Frankenstein. It could receive, sort of, mid-range frequencies, narrow bandwidth, signals that had to be strong and relatively close, but transmitting. That required power they didn't have, amplifiers they couldn't build, and a targeting array that had been melted into slag during the core's death throes. They were listeners in a silent cathedral. Any signals? Rook asked, though he knew the answer. Background cosmic noise, Jupiter's radio storms, the usual quantum static. Hayes finally turned, her face thinner than it had been during the standoff in this very bay. Dark circles haunted her eyes. Nothing structured, nothing human, Rook nodded, his gaze returning to the stars. For the first few months, they'd clung to the hope that others had survived, that the Ark wasn't the only ship, that colonies on Mars or in the Belt might have been spared Romulus's touch. That Earth, with its layers of redundant systems and deep bunkers, might have endured. But as the silence stretched, that hope curdled into a quieter, more terrifying understanding. They might be it. The last 127 human souls in existence. The station hummed around them, a different hum than the Novum Avum's harmonic resonance. This was the sound of jury-rigged systems, of pumps straining to clean air, of hydroponics gardens growing under artificial suns, of 127 people trying to build a future on the edge of oblivion. Shift change in 10, Hayes said, her tone shifting to the practical. Kai's team is finishing the algae vat repairs. Jax wants to see you about the water reclamation numbers. Tell him I'll be there. Hayes paused, studying him. You should sleep, sir. You were on the observation deck all night again. Noted. She didn't push. They'd all developed their coping mechanisms. Hayes buried herself in data and duty. Jax, the former security officer who'd taken over logistics, turned everything into numbers and probabilities. Rook. Rook watched the stars and listened for echoes. His quarters were a converted storage locker near the bay's command center. Spartan, functional, a sleeping pod, a small desk, a locker for his few possessions. The only personal item was a small, unmarked data chip he kept in a sealed container, Commander Reed's final truth, the last fragment of Silent Spring. He hadn't accessed it since coming to Wayfinder. Some truths were heavy enough without reopening them. As he moved through the station's central corridor, they'd stopped calling it a bay months ago. He acknowledged the nods from passing crew. They'd given up military ranks in all but structure. They were all just survivors now. But old habits died hard, and Rook's bearing, the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly assessed threats even in safe spaces, marked him as what he was, their de facto commander. Not by election, but by the unspoken consensus that he was the one who had faced the darkness and returned to tell about it. The scarred witness. The medical bay was a brighter space, its walls lined with salvaged panels that simulated a blue sky. A pathetic attempt at psychology, but it worked. Dr. Lenore, the only surviving physician from the Ark, had turned it into a place of quiet efficiency, and in the corner bed, forever peaceful, forever empty, lay Evander. The exobotanist hadn't changed in a year, still breathing, still metabolizing nutrients fed through a tube, his brain still showing that perfectly harmonious sine wave, the ultimate harmonized human, Romulus's first perfect work. They kept him alive out of a morbid sense of duty, or perhaps as a reminder. A monument to what they were fighting against. His readings are stable, Dr. Lenore said, without looking up from her tablet. She'd taken Evander's condition personally as a professional failure. No change. Any luck with the neural stim trials? None. It's as if the higher functions aren't damaged but rerouted, tuned to a frequency we can't access. She finally looked at Rook, her expression grim. He's happy, Major. In whatever passes for consciousness in that state. That's the horror of it. Rook moved on, the taste in his mouth turning more bitter. The mess hall was crowded with the mid-shift crew. The smell of nutrient paste and hydroponic greens filled the air. They'd gotten better at growing things. Real tomatoes now, not just algae and fungus. Small victories. He spotted Vance at a corner table, going over schematics with two engineers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical knot, streaks of gray more prominent than he remembered. A year of command had etched new lines at the corners of her eyes, but the intensity in them was undiminished. She glanced up as he approached, a flicker of something, acknowledgement, assessment, passing between them. Their relationship had settled into a carefully maintained professionalism. They were the two pillars holding up the fragile roof of their society. He handled the external threats, the strategic decisions, the big picture. She handled the internal stability, the resource allocation, the human problems. They met daily, discussed station business, made decisions. They rarely spoke of what had happened in the core chamber or in the years before. Some bridges were too damaged to cross, even if both survivors stood on opposite banks, looking at the same wreckage. "Rook," she said, her voice even. "Jax is looking for you." "I know. Water numbers. Worse than expected. The recycler's efficiency is dropping faster than projected. We need to decide between rationing or diverting power from the relay to run a deeper purification cycle." "Not the relay," Rook said immediately. "We might not have a choice. Thirsty people don't care about signals from the void." "I'll talk to Jax." She nodded, returning to her schematics. The conversation was over. Efficient. Professional. He remembered a time, years ago on Mars, when their conversations had been filled with laughter and the easy camaraderie of soldiers on leave. He remembered the way she'd defended him at the inquiry, the desperation in her eyes when she'd failed. Those memories were ghosts now, faint echoes in the vast silence between them. Jax, no one used his first name anymore, had his headquarters in what had been the Bay's armory. It was now a forest of screens showing resource flow charts, inventory lists, and population metrics. Jax himself was a bear of a man who had swapped his security armor for a technician's jumpsuit. His CI tattoo, 8102, still marked his forearm, a relic of a system that no longer existed. "Rook," Jax grunted, not looking up from a display showing water consumption graphs. "We've got a problem." Vance mentioned. "Worse than she knows. The recycler's main polymer membrane is degrading. We've patched it 3 times. 4th time might be the charm that floods the lower decks with contaminated slurry." He finally looked up, his face grim. "We need a new membrane, or a whole new system. What are our options?" Option 1. Cannibalize the environmental systems from the 2 wrecked shuttles we haven't touched yet. That gives us parts, but not a perfect match. Might buy us 6 months. Option 2. Find a working water recycler somewhere else. Jack said it flatly, knowing how it sounded. Where, exactly? That's the question, isn't it? Jax leaned back, crossing his massive arms. The Ark's debris field has chunks big enough to explore. Some of them might have intact systems. It's a radiation-soaked micrometeorite-pelted graveyard, but it's the only hardware store in town. Rook studied the graphs. The numbers didn't lie. They had maybe 2 months before water rationing became severe. 3 before people started getting sick. Organize a scavenging team. Small, experienced. Use the functional shuttle. Survey the largest fragments. Look for environmental control sections. Risk assessment, high. Reward, uncertain. Do it anyway. Jax nodded, already turning to his console to begin planning. That was one thing Rook appreciated about the man. No unnecessary debate. Once a decision was made, he executed.